there another, John, did you have a question?
Yeah, I wanted to go back to the cost benefit analysis that you referred to. I think that in advising a buyer, client, or potential buyer, it would seem like one of the biggest determinants of whether they want to go through with the transaction is, what is this going to cost me? And obviously it's hard to put a fine point on that, but is there anything other than, obviously the degree of the contamination is going to run your consulting costs, your engineering costs up. Is there anything else in the process that you would say affects the overall cost, so that you go back to your client and say, well, I kind of think it might cost this, other than if we find more contamination? Is there anything else that's a big factor there?
You know, I'm curious, Bill, you having done a bunch of them now, you have to build these pro formas, presumably. What else are we missing?
Well, you know, I think at a certain point you also have to say, you know, what is that real estate worth to me? So it's not just the cost of the cleanup. Sometimes it's just an added expense. But if it's at Main and Main, and it's one of those sites that any developer would want, there's also the upside for future is that you have one of those A corners, one of those great sites. It has to make sense. In a lot of cases in Claxton, we won't get all that money back. But it's okay because we've got a store that is probably outperforming anywhere else we could put it in that town. And so from that standpoint, that cash that comes back to us is still, you know, the most important thing in that equation. You have to go back and redo your pro formas. Anytime you're in due diligence and you find out there's a problem. What if it wasn't contaminated and you just had organic material in there that you can't build on? You had to excavate that out. So, well, my site costs are going to be $200,000 more. What does that do to the pro forma? But, you know, this is one of those programs where, you know, there's a handful of corners, and I would recommend anyone who does any development, try not to work on B and C corners anyway, or B and C sites. You know, this is really, as we go forward, fewer and fewer retailers need to build bricks and stick stores. It's unfortunate, but that's the case. So at some point, I will be kind of like a dentist for a dinosaur. There won't be a need for a guy like me. But you know, if you're getting that A corner, someone will always want that in town. And so, and that's the purpose of the redevelopment, because it's going to come back. So it may become a more longer-term hold, or you just have to say, hey, the risk is too great. We can spend our money in other places where there's lower-hanging fruit, where we'll still get a return. Now, my portfolio of the stores that we've done so far is a little over 22%. And so a lot of developers would be happy with a lot less. We set a high standard. If the return is there, you find a way a lot of times to eat that cost, or hope that you'll recoup a portion of it, and hope that your store will outperform what your projections were anyway.
You know, it's interesting what you say about in-town event that we just had in Columbus, which some of you were at. The mayor of Columbus was one of the presenters, and she said, you know, we've done a lot of redevelopment in Columbus, and there's going to be a lot more. The reason there's going to be a lot more is that's where the market's driving. People want to live in town. People want those locations. So you may not be needed eventually, but at least according to the mayor of Columbus, for a while, you're definitely going to be.
All right, good to know.
Any other questions?
I was going to just comment.
Yes, please.
So it is pretty predictable. So you can lay out a pretty predictable budget for what a brownfield project is going to cost. You know what the engineering cost is going to be, the application fee, the assessment costs. The biggest thing, vapor intrusion, if you have to mitigate vapor intrusion, the biggest variable is what the biggest variable always is, which is once you get in the ground, where are you going to stop? And that's dependent on the risk there is dependent on how much sampling you do. But really what you're trying to figure out, since we know what the cleanup standards are going to be up front, either because you pulled them off the shelf or you calculated them and you asked EPD in advance to bless your numbers, really you're talking about is how big a box of dirt do I have to dig up? And that's a pretty basic thing, you know, how deep and how wide is it going to be? And if you do enough sampling, if it's a predictable thing like a release that sort of spreads out laterally and vertically, you can come up with a pretty decent budget, where your contingency just doesn't have to be that wild. And you know whether it's, you can make that calculation about whether you got room in your pro forma to dig up a box of dirt.
You know,
And some of the things we've done on Bill's sites is, it's, you know, he's, like he said earlier about not getting in a corner or getting into the time crunch. You know, he's given us the time frame to actually, okay, we've done the initial phase 2, 3 or 4 borings, 5 borings out there, we got a problem. So now, do we have a $20,000 problem, $500,000 problem, $1 million problem? You know, let's don't close on the property until we figure out what the ultimate risk is. So then we go back out. That's when you know, as Bill was saying, extend the time frames on your contract. You know, let's go back out and do some, you know, and to save money on the back end, let's do some brownfield style site assessment. You know, shallow, deep, you know, groundwater here and there to try to cover the site to see what you're ultimately going to get into as far as remediation costs. So you can hone down what your box is going to be. Another driver would be, you know, if you can't control your time, you're just going to have to, you know, if you shorten your time frame, you're just going to increase costs to get the equipment on site quicker, faster, and get everybody to drop other side things to come to you. That would be the only.
and you can take your time and drill it properly. You know, geoprobe, a lot of you know because you're in the business, so I would assume probably a lot of others that don't. Geoprobe's probably a third of the size of this desk. It's on tracks, it can move around on your property, you're gonna rent it for the day, you might as well keep it busy. Take as many samples as you need. When you find those hot spots, they can kind of tell in the field, this looks a little abnormal. Just keep those samples going, because if you submit some paperwork and just say, oh, hopefully we're gonna miss this, you know, it's like a bomb, we wanna miss it, we're gonna send that paperwork off and EPD's gonna look at it and they're gonna send it right back and say, you didn't do enough sampling, you need to go back and do it again. Well, I would certainly hate to bring a probe back out a second time to have to do that. So you're just better off to do it thoroughly, and if there's a problem, if it's that much of a problem, you also have a sense of responsibility to the neighborhood. You want to help these folks clean this up, or at least identify that there's a problem. So, you know, but you know, good testing, a large number of samples will take care of most of your problems with your estimates anyway.